Okay, so you guys sent us a ton of stuff about the Golden State Killer, and wow, this is one of those cases that really gets under your skin.
Absolutely.
Decades of terror in California. We're talking burglaries, rapes, murders. It's like a real-life horror movie, and the fact that it went unsolved for so long just adds to the whole mystery.
Yeah, it's fascinating how this case really unfolded, like a puzzle with pieces scattered all over the place, different names, different police departments.
Right.
But the same horrifying pattern was slowly emerging.
Yeah, like someone was putting the pieces together in slow motion while this guy was out there living his life. It's crazy.
It really is.
So to really understand it, we need to go back even before the official Golden State Killer timeline, like way back.
Okay.
Our sources take us back to 1974, Visalia, California. And this is where we meet the Visalia ransacker.
That's right. And this is where we see those early signs, not just of criminal activity,
Right.
but of a criminal mind developing. The ransacker started with what seemed like petty thefts, snatching random things from homes.
Right, like small stuff.
Exactly. But then there was an attempted kidnapping.
Oh, wow.
And tragically, a fatal shooting.
So from like 0 to 60 in no time.
Yeah, it's a huge leap to go from stealing trinkets to taking a life.
It's like he was testing the waters, getting bolder with each crime.
Yeah.
But to go from, like you said, stealing trinkets to taking a life, that's a whole other level.
It is, and it's a leap that many criminologists believe points to a deep-seated psychological disturbance.
Oh, really?
These early crimes, as unsettling as they were almost like a rehearsal for the horrors that were to come.
Wow, that's a chilling thought.
It is.
So from there, our sources jump ahead to 1976. The scene shifts to Northern California, and the Visalia ransacker seems to just vanish.
Yeah.
But in his place, a new terror emerges.
The East Area rapist.
Over 40 rapes in just a few years.
Yeah.
This wasn't just petty crime anymore. This was a full-blown predator.
Absolutely. And the level of planning and control in these attacks is what really sets this case apart.
Yeah, I was reading about that.
The sources describe how he would meticulously stalk his victims,
Yeah.
learn their routines, break into their homes, and spend hours inside before the attacks.
Can you imagine the fear those people must have lived with?
It's unimaginable.
Not knowing if or when he'd strike? It's just unfathomable.
And then there's that detail, the
Yeah.
one that really sends chills down your spine.
Yeah.
He would sometimes cry during the attacks.
Oh my gosh.
What does that tell us about his mental state?
You read about serial killers, and there's always this attempt to understand why.
Right.
Is it remorse? Is it some twisted sense of empathy?
Yeah.
What kind of person cries while committing these horrific acts? It's just mind-boggling.
It's one of those details that even with DeAngelo behind bars,
Right.
continues to fascinate and puzzle investigators to this day.
It's like a piece of the puzzle that just doesn't quite fit.
Exactly.
One of our sources really dives into the East Area rapist's MO. This terrifying ritual with dishes.
Yeah.
He'd stack plates on a sleeping man's back, threaten to kill everyone if the dishes rattled when his wife woke up.
It's unbelievable.
I mean, can you imagine that level of terror?
It wasn't just about the assault.
Right.
It was about the psychological torture, the complete domination of his victims. He wanted them to know he was in control,
Right.
that their lives are in his hands.
It's like he was playing a sick game with them.
Yeah.
And we're not talking about adults.
Yeah.
Only some of the victims were as young as 13. Think about the lasting trauma,
I know, it's heartbreaking.
the scars that something like that leaves on a young life.
It's truly horrific, and for some victims,
Yeah.
the terror didn't end with the attack itself.
What do you mean?
He would sometimes make taunting phone calls afterward,
No way.
reliving the trauma, keeping them living in fear.
So he was deliberately tormenting them even after the attack.
It seems like it.
Okay, so we've got this escalation from petty theft to a string of increasingly violent rapes, all with this meticulous planning and psychological torment.
Right.
But then in 1979, everything changes. The rapes in Northern California stop,
Just like that.
just like that.
Yeah.
And almost simultaneously,
Right.
a new wave of violence begins in Southern California.
Yes.
This time, it's not rape,
No.
it's murder.
It's a whole new level of horror.
This is where the Golden State Killer,
Yeah.
now known as the original Night Stalker,
Right.
truly earns his chilling moniker.
Absolutely. It's like he flipped a switch,
Yeah.
He went from these rapes, which were horrific in their own right,
Right.
to something even darker and more violent.
It's like he was evolving, becoming even more dangerous and depraved.
Exactly.
The rapes, as horrific as they were, seemed to be about control, about instilling fear.
Yeah.
But the murders were something else entirely.
They were brutal, rage-filled, almost animalistic.
Yeah, one of our sources describes the crime scenes in Southern California as incredibly violent. He was targeting couples, now breaking into their homes, attacking them in their sleep. It wasn't just about silencing them, it was about inflicting pain.
It's chilling thought.
And there was a new level of randomness to the attacks.
That's right.
With the East Area rapist, there seemed to be a pattern, a type of victim he preferred. But with the original Night Stalker, it felt like anyone could be a target.
Yeah, it's like he lost all sense of restraint.
It must have been terrifying for people living in those areas.
Oh, absolutely.
Imagine going to bed every night wondering if you'd be the next victim.
It's a nightmare scenario.
And for years, people lived under that cloud of fear, and the police seemed to be hitting dead end after dead end.
Well, you have to remember the challenges investigators faced back then.
Yeah.
No DNA databases, no widespread use of forensic technology like we have today.
Right?
They were relying on witness statements, fingerprints, and good old-fashioned detective work.
It's no wonder this case went unsolved for so long.
It's amazing they were able to connect any of the dots at all.
It's almost unfathomable to think that in the 1970s, the statute of limitations for rape was only 3 years.
Wow.
Some of the evidence from the East Area rapist cases was actually destroyed because they thought it was no longer relevant. Can you imagine that happening today?
It's hard to believe, isn't it?
It's a stark reminder of how far we've come in terms of understanding the lasting impact of sexual assault and the importance of preserving evidence.
Absolutely, but back then it was a different world. These crimes, as horrific as they were often seen as something victims should just get over.
Right.
And evidence was treated accordingly.
So we've got this incredibly complex case spanning 2 regions, multiple types of crimes, and decades of mystery. It's no wonder that different jurisdictions ended up giving this guy different nicknames. For a while, some of the murders were even misattributed to other serial killers.
Yeah, one of our sources mentions the Diamond Knot Killer.
Oh.
That was a term used to describe a series of unsolved murders in Southern California that involved a distinctive knot used to bind the victims for a time. They thought it was a separate killer, but eventually it was linked back to the Golden State Killer.
It's like they were dealing with a ghost, a phantom who could change his methods and his location at will. It must have been incredibly frustrating for investigators.
Oh, for sure.
Knowing they were dealing with one guy, but unable to connect all the dots.
And in the midst of all this, you have this true crime writer named Michelle McNamara who becomes obsessed with the case.
Yes, Michelle McNamara.
She's the one who actually coined the term Golden State Killer, giving this shadowy figure a more unified identity.
She was like a dog with a bone.
I know, she was incredible.
She spent years digging through police reports, interviewing survivors, and trying to make sense of it all. One of our sources mentions that she even built this huge map of the crimes, trying to find patterns, connections that everyone else had missed.
She was determined to crack this case.
And she wasn't just rehashing the facts. She was bringing a fresh perspective, a writer's eye to the case. She was able to connect with survivors in a way that police often couldn't, drawing out details that helped to humanize the victims and shed new light on the killer's methods.
Her work was groundbreaking.
It's really tragic that she died in 2016 before she could finish her book, I'll Be Gone in the Dark. But you know what? Her husband, the actor, Patton Oswalt, made sure it got published, and it became a bestseller. Talk about a powerful legacy.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Her work played a huge role in keeping this case in the public eye, reminding people that this guy was still out there and that justice was still waiting to be served. And in a way, her book was almost prophetic.
How so?
Just 2 years after it was published, they finally caught him.
That's right, 2018.
The news broke that they had finally identified the Golden State Killer, and it was all thanks to the very technology that was missing for all those years, DNA analysis.
But with a twist.
What do you mean?
They use a technique called familial DNA searching.
Familial DNA search.
Basically, they took the DNA profile from one of the crime scenes and ran it through a genealogy database looking for partial matches, and that led them to a distant relative of Joseph James DeAngelo.
Wait, hold on. So they caught this guy who had been terrorizing California for decades by looking at his family tree online.
Pretty much, they built out his family tree, narrowed down the suspects based on age, location, and other factors, and eventually it all pointed to DeAngelo. They got a DNA sample from him, and it was a match.
Then here's the kicker. The guy was a former police officer.
I know, crazy, right?
Yeah, I mean, talk about mind-blowing. The person sworn to protect and serve was the one committing these horrific crimes. It just shattered people's trust in the system.
It raises so many questions.
It does.
How could someone in a position of authority, someone who is supposed to uphold the law, be the one breaking it so brutally?
Right.
Was he living a double life? Did anyone suspect?
And you have to wonder, did his law enforcement background actually help him evade capture for so long? Did he use his knowledge of police procedures to stay one step ahead?
It's definitely possible.
It's almost too much to wrap your head around.
I know.
A seemingly ordinary guy, a cop, living this double life as one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. It's insane.
And the craziest part is when they finally arrested him, he was 72 years old,
72.
living in a quiet suburb of Sacramento.
Wow.
Nobody suspected a thing.
I remember when they released those photos of him from his police days.
Oh, yeah.
This clean-cut young officer,
Mm.
and then you see him in court, this frail old man.
Mm.
It's hard to believe it's the same person.
It really is, but those photos are a powerful reminder that evil can hide in plain sight,
Yeah.
It doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it wears a uniform, a friendly smile, a seemingly normal life.
It's a chilling thought. So what happened after his arrest?
Oh.
Did he confess? Did he try to explain his actions?
Surprisingly, DeAngelo didn't put up much of a fight.
Really?
He eventually pleaded guilty to 13 murders and numerous other crimes, including rapes that were beyond the statute of limitations. He received multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole.
So that was it. After decades of terror, he just admits to it and gets locked away.
Well, for the victims and their families, it was a long-awaited moment of justice, but also a mixed bag of emotions.
I can imagine.
Some felt relief, some felt anger, some felt a sense of closure, while others felt like it would never truly be over.
Yeah, one of our sources interviewed a woman whose parents were murdered by DeAngelo.
Oh, wow.
And she said that hearing him plead guilty was like a weight lifted off her shoulders, but it didn't bring her parents back.
And that's the thing about these kinds of cases. Even with a conviction, the scars run deep.
They do.
The trauma, the fear, the loss, those things linger long after the headlines fade.
It's true. But at least now the survivors and the families know who did it, and he's paying for his crimes. That has to count for something, right?
Absolutely. There's a sense of validation in seeing justice served, even if it's delayed. And for the investigators who dedicated their careers to this case,
Yeah.
it was a huge victory.
I can't imagine the pressure they were under all those years of dead ends, the weight of knowing this guy was still out there hurting people.
It must have been incredibly heavy, but they never gave up.
Yeah.
And that's the inspiring thing about this case. The resilience of the human spirit, the unwavering pursuit of truth and justice, even when it seems impossible.
It's a powerful message.
Yeah.
So we've gone from petty thefts to a reign of terror that spanned decades, a mystery that captivated and horrified the nation, and finally a resolution thanks to the power of modern technology and the tireless work of investigators. It's a story that has it all: the darkness of human nature, the brilliance of forensic science, and the enduring hope for justice.
And even with DeAngelo behind bars, the Golden State Killer case continues to fascinate and haunt us. It's a story that compels us to ask those big questions about good and evil, about the monsters that can lurk beneath the surface of ordinary life, and about the enduring power of the human spirit to fight for what's right, no matter how long it takes.
It's a story that will stay with us for a long time if you're like us, and you're completely absorbed by this case. I highly recommend diving deeper. Michelle McNamara's book, I'll Be Gone in the Dark, is a must-read.
Definitely.
It's not just about the case itself, it's about her obsession, her relentless pursuit of the truth, and her tragically unfinished quest.
And there are countless other resources out there, documentaries, podcasts, articles that explore different facets of this case, from the psychological profile of the killer to the impact on the victims and their families.
This deep dive was just the beginning. The Golden State Killer story is a complex tapestry of crime punishment and the enduring search for meaning in the face of tragedy. We encourage you to keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep those conversations going. Thanks for joining us.